Now the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Kerry.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review, also the author of The Weed Agency. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks to Brett Winterbull for pinch hitting for me on Thursday and Friday. Good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives as usual. And, Jim, we start with the good. And one of the things we were worried about in 2008 was one of the things we're also worried about a little bit heading into 2016, and that's that Hillary Clinton would have an unchallenged march to the nomination. Obviously, that wasn't the case in 2008, and now it's looking less and less the case in 2016. There's rumblings of Elizabeth Warren. She just outlined her 11 principles of progressivism. You've got Martin O'Malley making rumblings. You've got Jerry Brown even suggesting he's getting in the race, or at least Gary Hart doing it on his behalf. And now the President of the United States highly touting his Vice President, Joe Biden. In a Biden profile in The New Yorker, Obama says, "I think Joe would be a superb president. He has seen the job up close. He knows what the job entails. He understands how to separate what's really important from what's less important. I think he's got great people skills. He enjoys politics. He's got important relationships up on the Hill that would serve him well." And, Jim, I don't think any of us would agree with any of what he just said about Joe Biden, but the fact that it's going to be potentially a competitive Democratic primary could be very good for us.
Yeah, and a couple of things jump out from this. The first is that clearly, if the Hillary book tour was meant as sort of a dress rehearsal of her presidential campaign, a chance to show her charisma on the stump and kind of to scare off all of her rivals, clearly that didn't happen. In fact, maybe it did the opposite. The likes of Warren and Joe Biden and perhaps even Jerry Brown were all kind of saying, okay, no, she looks vulnerable. She looks beatable. This is, it wasn't a coronation last time, and there's not a reason to think it'll be a coronation this time. I think that the figure that just jumped out to me the most, that I found most interesting, Greg, is the idea that Jerry Brown might be running again. I think it's now turning into something sort of like the cicadas. Every 20 years, Jerry Brown runs for president or something. They'll be well on schedule for the year 2036 as well.
Yes, exactly.
So, look, I mean, on the one hand, Democrats could say, hey, good for us, we have more choices. In a way, that's a very good thing for democracy. I don't think we're supposed to have coronations for our nominations in either party. But also, this is going to use up money and resources and time and the possibility of bad blood there. Democrats managed to unite behind their nominee back in 2008. They probably are likely to do the same for 2016, but we'll see. It sounds like in Netroots Nation, everybody was ready to jump behind Elizabeth Warren, suggesting that she's either going to, Hillary's going to have to drift left as she pursues the nomination, or maybe she'll just have a good chunk of the base that's just not impressed with her.
On to the bad martini now, and there's plenty of bad news on the international front. John Kerry, the Secretary of State, was talking about the situation with the downed Malaysian airliner in Ukraine, and as well as the situation in the Middle East. Interestingly, on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace pulled up a bit of video and audio of Kerry not believing he was going to be videotaped and put on air. He was talking to one of his aides, and here's what he had to say to his aide about the latest violence in the Middle East.
Yeah. It's a hell of a pinpoint operation. Right. It's escalating significantly, and it just underscores the need for ceasefire. We've got to get over there. Yep. Thank you, John. I think, John, we ought to go tonight. I think it's crazy to be sitting around.
So, Jim, not exactly as embarrassing as an off-mic comment could be, but it's pretty clear what Kerry seems to think about the ongoing operation. He seems to think he's uniquely positioned to solve it.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. On the one hand, you could say this is a bit of public relations 101. Don't forget that the camera's in front of you. Don't forget that you have hot mics up there. Maybe he really needed to take that call and just couldn't help himself responding, a heck of a pinpoint operation there. Not the worst, as you said. However, one of the things that kind of jumps to mind is that, one, Hamas was offered a opportunity for a ceasefire and turned it down because they said that they weren't consulted, and by golly, that wasn't good enough for them. And Israel is in a situation where, look, they've decided their goal from this is a demilitarized Gaza Strip. They do not want Hamas to have much of a military force when all is said and done. Now, that may be a very tall order for them, but it's going to take a lot of persuasion to say that to Israel, look, you're going to have to live with Hamas having some rockets. You're going to have to deal with them having this capability of shooting rockets into your territory and killing people. And what we're seeing here is the Israelis saying, look, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And they're going to do what it takes to clean out the Gaza Strip and, get rid of these tunnels that the Hamas is using to get into Israeli territory. It is awful and it is bloody. But this idea that, the United States Secretary of State can go into the region and get both sides to agree to a ceasefire that clearly neither one of them wants. It seems kind of, an act of hubris and arrogance and this, kind of this assumption that we know their best interests better than they do. And we really shouldn't be surprised when this effort, falls flat on its face in a couple of days.
On to the crazy martini now, and back to Jim's ongoing expose on government waste, and from the very same source as we talked with last week in terms of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Last week we were talking about $40 million a pop for C-130 cargo planes that the Afghans simply aren't using. Now Jim reporting the Pentagon spent $2.89 million to build a food processing facility in Helmand Province in Afghanistan, a project of the Department of Defense's Task Force for Business and Stability Operations. The Special Inspector General unveiled a review finding that the facility has never been used and is not being maintained. It provides approximately 10,000 square feet of cold storage and 13,000 square feet of dry storage, and then nothing happened. Jim, obviously, in terms of our annual deficits and total debt, $2.89 million is not a huge sum, but this is how we get to that sum.
Yeah, and also I think if you can look, this is part of a series. I think I want to salute the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. They've been doing a series here, and they have found planes that we're giving the Afghan Air Force that they're not using, a whole bunch of barracks we've built for them that are apparently not up to international standards for fire prevention, because, hey, what are the odds of a fire on an Afghan military base, right? It's not like people will be shooting mortars at it or anything. And there's some really frustrating, I think, tough lessons here, both for the kind of let's spend more on foreign aid left, but also I think a bit for the Bush administration, kind of hawkish or neoconish right that wanted to leave stable, capable countries behind us when we left Afghanistan and Iraq. The issue here, it's not that the Pentagon had a bad idea when they created this task force for business and stability operations. They wanted to give the Afghans jobs and have things, a thriving economy so they can have something to do besides joining the Taliban or raising opium. So they built this food processing facility. The idea being that if you're some poor Afghan farmer, you can make more money if you can sell your produce or your crops, further distance by having it processed and, canned or put in, whatever stuff you need to do so you can ship it further rather than having to sell it at the local market and hoping that people are in the mood to buy that day. It was a perfectly fine idea. The problem is this is Helmand Province, which is one of the tougher and rougher, corners of Afghanistan. Lots of opium production in this area. It sounds like the facility was built up to specifications. It's perfectly fine. It's just not used. And this really falls on the Afghans, that basically they had one potential buyer or guy who's interested in buying it and running it. This guy had his storage facility somewhere in Kabul suddenly damaged. I don't know if it was, mortar shells or gunfire or what did it, but basically says all of a sudden this guy doesn't have the money to buy it. And so now we've spent close to $3 million building this facility out in the middle of this, key part of Helmand Province, and nobody's using it. And it sounds like that basically for the past year or two, at least U.S. civilian contractors can't get out there because it's just deemed too dangerous, too much insurgent activity. So it's just sitting out there and not being maintained and kind of tough to tell what conditions it's in. You could say, yes, this is only $3 million, but we have spent billions trying to rebuild a functioning Afghan government and functioning society in Afghanistan. And it looks like day by day, we're just not going to have much to show for it. And I think it really kind of challenges, like I said, folks on the left who want to spend more on foreign aid, because I think you can really raise the question of whether it gets us our money's worth or really does make the world a better place, or whether it ends up getting, flushed down rat holes. And in the case of, folks on the right, a lot of folks on the right wanted to see a thriving Afghanistan left behind, and the indications are not looking good. And part of it is that, we spend enormous amounts of money to give them stuff to build a better society, and they don't use it out of corruption or inertia or infighting or other problems like that. So it is a depressing set of circumstances there, but I got to salute the, talk about people who are trying to fight government waste or at least make government more efficient. Inspector generals are actually doing a pretty good job on this front.
Yeah, certainly this one seems to be doing a good job, and kudos to you for making that more public than it already was in the report. So good to be back. Jim, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.